I want to thank you all for joining us today for the Department of English Presents Going Far with an English Major. We are presenting Roger Smith, and I'm super excited for y'all to be here with us today. And so there are some events posting on the screen, so if you can join us for some of those events later this semester. Roger's going to talk about his journey for a few minutes. And then you'll have the opportunity to ask some questions. You can either put your questions in the chat or unmute, come on camera, and ask your question out loud. We are recording this conversation so that others can watch it at a later time. And so because I don't want to spoil way too much about who Roger is, one of the things I can say about Roger is that he is what I like to call a friend of the Department of English in so many ways. He hosts events for people who get their books published in the department. He allows us to host what we call the Movable Feast Lecture there. He's a 1990 alum of the Department of English on the Armstrong campus. And so education is his lifelong career aspiration, if I do say so myself. And so I will let Roger take it away. Roger, please, welcome, welcome, welcome.
Thank you so much. What Dr. Parker said is true, that I am a friend of the department. The department is also a friend to me, it must be said. So what I do day in and day out, and what I've done for the last more than 19 years, is direct a lifelong learning program. And if that phrase needs to be decoded for you, I'll tell you that lifelong learning institutes and lifelong learning programs are put into place generally for retired people. Different programs have different age minimums, 55 years of age or older, 60 years, 70, 65 years, and so on. So for the past just about 2 decades, I've put together programming, lectures, short courses, longer courses, some educational travel, other learning opportunities for older adults, generally people who have retired from their career. And so when I say that the department, and indeed the whole university, is a friend to me, what I mean is it's a friend to the program that I direct, which is called the Learning Center. If you were to go through our 44-page catalog and cut out with scissors all of the mentions of Georgia Southern University, our catalog would be thinner indeed. So we owe a lot to the generosity of time and expertise to not just the English department, but the history department and the philosophy department, and on and on. The Learning Center embraces all disciplines within the humanities. The only thing we don't do at the Learning Center is have courses that remind people of their age. We have people who are in our programs because they are intellectually engaged and naturally curious, and it doesn't really matter to us what their age is. It's just that at 1:30 in the afternoon, most people are working if they're not 60 and over. So that tends to be our target audience. Dr. Parker asked me to spend a little bit of time filling in the years between my graduation as an English major from Armstrong State University, it was called back then, and where I am now directing this multidisciplinary lifelong learning program. And she was right when she said that the arc has been, yes, I'm going to praise being an English major, and I'm going to give you some really specific examples of how an English degree has really equipped me to handle a lot of the challenges and to reach out for a lot of the opportunities that have been given to me. But I would say education is just as big an arc, and it starts with almost 10 years in the high school classroom for me. So when I was an English undergraduate, I chose I didn't know what I wanted to do exactly as an English major. I did declare an English major, English path pretty early on, before the end of my freshman year at Armstrong. And if anybody wants to know how that exactly transpired, I'll be glad to go into more detail later on. It was either going to be English or history, and let's just say that a really persuasive English professor got to me first. And so that's how that, and I don't regret it. I think it was a great pathway. But I took the undergraduate path of baking into my degree program teacher education, teacher preparation. And what I was thinking when I did that was, this will be job security. An English major can do a lot of different things. I could be a writer, I could be a journalist, there's all kinds of things. But I thought, I'm going to go ahead and devote the credit hours needed in the education department so that I will graduate with the credentials to go into the classroom. And the closer I got to graduation in 1990, the more excited I was about being a classroom teacher. Yeah, I graduated in on June the 1st, 1990, and I started my very first teaching job on August the 11th, 1990. I had been 22 years old for 1 month when I was in my own classroom. And now it has to be said that I had an enormously luxurious student teaching assignment in the spring of 1990. They were quarters back then, not semesters. So I don't really know who was responsible for my teaching assignment, but it was within a public school, Jenkins High School here in Savannah. But it was almost like an elite academy within Jenkins High School. That school was at the time, and it may still remain, I don't know, the math and science magnet school. That's probably very old vocabulary. But it turns out that students who are really good in math and science, all of whom are college bound, tend to be pretty good English students too. And so the teacher I was put with was a veteran teacher who made my life wonderful. And her very, very, very bright students made my 12 weeks with them very easy. Um, I went to work in a fairly sheltered private school environment that was, it must be admitted, quite similar to the high school that I attended myself. It felt kind of like just an extension of a private school environment where almost 100% the students were college bound and their parents really valued their education. So I did not have discipline problems at all, and I got to enjoy just being a teacher. And I was a French teacher as well. Armstrong at the time did not have an official French degree offering, but I took as many French courses as I did English literature courses or literature courses, and so graduated with the ability to teach French equally as much as English. So I had a really diverse day of French and English, and of course they often make the new guy manage the yearbook as well. So that was another one of my assignments. I did that willingly. It was perfect. I had been on the yearbook staff in high school, so it was a really nice day. I think I would have gotten bored with the same classroom preparation over and over again. I taught with math teachers, for example, who taught the same geometry class 5 times a day, 5 sections a day, and I think I would have just thrown myself out of a second story window if I had had to do that kind of repetition. So I liked the diversity of that. There are some very specific reasons at year 9 that I decided to look elsewhere than the high school classroom. And if anybody who's joined our group, if you really want to know, I won't say gory details. I don't mean that. I mean that metaphorically. It was a fairly unhappy conclusion to 9.5 years of teaching. And again, I'll give you details if you want to know, but that would slow us down at this stage. But I went looking for something else to do, and I was quite open to what that might be. I kind of looked at other schools. I put in an application with the Savannah Chatham County Public Schools, but I also applied for an assistant manager job in a bookstore. There was a wide variety of different pathways and different pay scales that I was willing to accept. Incredibly, I had the opportunity to interview it was an education job, and on paper, it was a teaching job, a regular 190-day teaching job with the Savannah Chatham County Public Schools. But the opening was a virtually unique teaching position in the school system, which was to be a museum educator. Some of you may not know that the Savannah Chatham County Public Schools owns a historic school. It's called Massey School, Massie. It's on the former Calhoun Square downtown. It's now Susie King Taylor Square on Abercorn and Gordon Streets. And the school, it's a teaching museum that the school system owns. And so they were in between museum educators. I had an English degree and kind of a French degree, not a history degree, but I applied for this job anyway and interviewed twice, once with the executive director and then with a second time with a fairly, I don't know, they were nice enough, but they meant business, a committee to fill that position for the school. And when I got that position, I believed that I would retire from that position. I was about 30 at the time, 31, I guess. And it was a dream position to work in my hometown in the historic district, talking about Savannah history, talking about Savannah's built environment, talking about architecture, conducting walking tours, and so on. It was really a dream job. And in the process of 2 years there, I began to work ever more closely with a very bright group of professionals at the Georgia Historical Society. You all may or may not realize that our state's historical society is headquartered in Savannah. It's in a very beautiful building at the intersection of Gaston and Whitaker Streets on the northwest corner of Forsyth Park, and that's within walking distance of the Massey School. And so, because of history programming within the school system that the Georgia Historical Society was conducting, I worked elbow to elbow with these really, really bright historians, especially their director of education, a woman who I still think she has probably the best name of anybody I've ever known personally. Her name was Octavia Starbuck, and you just can't make up a name like that. So I loved and adored Octavia. She and I worked together very well. But after I'd been at Massey for less than 2 years, actually, Octavia got an opportunity to go back to her home in Virginia to look after an aging grandparent for whom she was the main caretaker. And again, this was back home for her. So she got a museum position in Lynchburg, Virginia, at Thomas Jefferson's Poplar Forest. That's not the famous Monticello site, but the less famous country house of Thomas Jefferson. But anyway, Octavia's position went vacant for months before the Georgia Historical Society was able to fill it, and there were programs that needed to be done. There were things that are getting behind schedule. So I probably made a pest of myself by calling their human resources person and saying, "When are you going to fill this job?" And finally, the HR person, Deborah Haywood, said, we've interviewed all kinds of people. There are people with history PhDs. They look fantastic on paper. They come in and interview, and it's like just deflation all around. They would not work well with our team. They don't have the right chemistry. They don't have the right energy. And so this weird pause occurred in the phone conversation. And Deborah said, "Would you ever consider applying for this job?" And I said, "Deborah, forget advanced degrees in history. I don't even have an undergraduate degree in history." She said, "I don't think that matters." But she said, "Shoot me your resume," and which was fairly straightforward and simple, and 2 parts by this time. But it ended up being a fantastic opportunity. So after only 2 years at the Massey School, a job which I loved, the Georgia Historical Society made me state director of education for history programming in the state. Now, this is not a public school or a Department of Education position. This is the state's historical society. So I got to play in all kinds of sandboxes, like creating teacher workshops in the summer. I was manager of the society's historical marker program, which are those metal plaques that you see all over the state. I was in charge of the society's it's called an affiliate chapter program. So local historical societies all over the state of Georgia could, for a very nominal amount of money, become affiliate chapters of the Georgia Historical Society. There were about 200 of those, each of whom was entitled to request a visit at some time during the year. So I got to a lot of the counties of Georgia in that way, and I got to plan wonderful public programming. It was my fun job to look at historical scholarship on a national or sometimes even international basis, and decided which historian authors we wanted to invite to Savannah and sometimes to Atlanta for public programming. So talk about a way to meet scholars who are doing fabulous and interesting work. So those were the main elements of the work I did at the Georgia Historical Society. It was through my work there that I got to meet a really wonderful and dynamic woman named Patty Lyons. Patty Lyons was at the time and remains today executive director of a social services organization called, it's a really clunky mid 20th century clinical sounding title, Senior Citizens Incorporated, or SCI if you want. So Senior Citizens Inc. Patty had been the executive director of this organization that provides home delivered meals to aging people, provided in-home care to shut-ins, had 3 neighborhood centers for senior citizens, and a number of other programs like that. And Patty and I got to know each other because she was the president of Savannah's Junior League chapter. And if you don't know what Junior League is, look it up. It's an organization for women. It's been around for about 100 years, and it gives women opportunities for leadership and civic contributions that at least 100 years ago were much more limited than they are today. One could argue probably still pretty limited today. So anyway, it's a place for women leaders in any number of different communities. So the Junior League of Savannah had a grant program that the Georgia Historical Society applied for. You apply for money for a specific purpose, and you have to take Junior League volunteers as well. And so the part of this grant application on, and again, I was still at the Georgia Historical Society, was to appear in person for an interview, not to defend your grant application, that's too strong a word, but basically to answer questions about it. So I did not know Patty Lyons. So I came to the Junior League meeting. Patty was there with about 5 or 6 other interviewers, and they asked me all the questions, and we got the grant. Patty asked a question at the end of, and I think she asked this of everybody. I wasn't present for other interviews, but she said, if the Junior League announced that we had more money than we expected to have, and we told you that you could ask for more money than your grant application asked for, what would you ask for the money for? And I had to think a second. You don't usually get that kind of question, but I had an answer for her. And she swears, now she might say this to all the girls, but she swears that I was the only person they interviewed who had an answer to that question. And so we got to be friends. We started having breakfast together from time to time. And a couple of years later, at one of these breakfast meetings, she told me about a grant that she had secured for Senior Citizens Incorporated, which had involved, it was already underway. Um, it involved a deep down survey of people 55 years of age and older living in one specific neighborhood in Savannah that happened to be Ardsley Park, which is a midtown neighborhood very, very close to the building where I work now. And so Patty said to me that what this survey had revealed is that the people in Ardsley Park, when asked what their local social services senior focused nonprofit could do for them to make their retirement easier or more enjoyable or more enriching, what they said was not what Senior Citizens Inc. was expecting to hear. They expected to hear home delivered meals, transportation to medical appointments or grocery stores. They expected to hear things like assistive devices in my house, like a grab bar and a shower. And I guess all of those things were there incrementally, but what the Ardsley Park senior population said overwhelmingly was, if you're really asking, we want a nearby, affordable, and academically rigorous senior education program. Now, let me decode what that means. Savannah is not a big city, but people like to feel like it's a big city. So nearby means we know Armstrong is there, but we don't really want to drive there. We think that's the end of the earth, and we don't want to do that. Hassle-free means if we're willing to drive to Armstrong, we don't want a sticker on our car or have to have inoculations or any of those things that go along with taking classes on campus. And this is the most important one. Academically rigorous meant, and I don't mean to besmirch any programs that involve knitting or playing bingo or preventing falls in your home, but that's not what they were talking about. They said, don't offer programs that are stereotypically for old people and call that lifelong learning. We want serious humanities education. So the reason that Patty wanted to talk to me about this is that she said, I've got brilliant and dedicated and wonderful social workers on my staff, but what this grant is leading us to is basically a mini college campus. And she said, I don't know anybody. I could have helped her, but she said, I don't know anybody who could do this. You've got the contacts, you know about education, you know your way around a classroom, et cetera. So she said, I want to know if you could leave the Georgia Historical Society and come to Senior Citizens to create something that doesn't exist yet. And that was the most excruciating professional decision I think I've ever made in my life. And I made her wait a ridiculously long time for an answer. But finally, I mean, I was very, very happy doing what I was doing for Georgia history. But ultimately, what won out was the opportunity to create something that didn't exist before. That was very appealing and very tantalizing. And when I look back across more than 19 years now, there are so many ways that it could have gone horribly, horribly wrong. But I feel very, very fortunate that enough people in this community, and I mean, professional academics like Dr. Parker and Dr. Howes, who were willing to play in my sandbox with me, but also people who were interested enough to come and be a viable audience for programs like this. I mean, you can have a great idea and you can mean well and you can do it, you can execute things well. But if 10 people come, you're not going to do that for very long. Our membership today is over 600 people, and I feel very fortunate every single day to get to do what I do. And again, I think education, you'll agree, is probably the overarching theme, but I do think that there are qualities that are instilled in English majors that have applications in every single chapter that I've laid out before you, and scores more besides the one that I've laid out before you. And, you know, I was born in Savannah, grew up in Savannah, stayed in Savannah, and I sometimes worry that on my deathbed I might feel like the most provincial person ever to live, to be born and live and die in the same place. But I think that my English degree from my hometown university has served me exceptionally well, and there's a very, very, very high level of life satisfaction and job satisfaction that I have to show for it.
Ooh, thank you. Virtual round of applause for Roger. Oh, I've got so many questions, but it's not about me. But I do have a couple before I open it up to the audience. But first of all, thank you so much. I love you really got, we were talking about this before the call started, but you really do have like four major segments of your life. And I love the trajectory, and I love the part where you said you were at the NASI school and it was your dream job and you loved it and you were willing to pivot, right? So you were willing to pivot, consider different pay scales and to move on. And then that really sort of segued into that last one. I'm a little terrified of the question, would you be willing to leave your current job satisfaction pay scale job to create something that doesn't exist yet? And so I wonder if you would be able to talk about that in relation to what our students may be facing now with there are jobs that or things that don't exist for them. You know, you've got AI, you've got social media marketing. Could you talk about how you made that decision? I think Glenn Dukes writes in the chat, he says that was definitely a hard decision to make. So, can you talk about that? Any imposter syndrome? I mean, I guess you don't agonize over it now. It's great. It's almost been 20 years.
Yeah.
But could you talk about the decision to do that?
Yeah. I mean, I guess I ended up feeling um, psychologically okay to step out into that, because if it was a mistake, I mean, I might not be able to go back to the exact position that I had before, but people make decisions like this every single day and bring less psychological weight to them than I was bringing to mine. So you could call me, a little bit dramatic maybe, but if this you don't make willy-nilly decisions, at least I don't. I try not to do that. But if something isn't right, you're going to know it, and then you do what you can either to refashion something for yourself in the same organization. And I believe that Patty and a number of other wonderful professionals at Senior Citizens, if the Learning Center, it didn't even have a name at the beginning, but what became the Learning Center, if it hadn't worked out, um, then I think they would have tried at least to find a better fit. But at the same time, you keep your eyes and ears open. And this is maybe a little bit of a leap, but Kendra, when you were telling me some things maybe to consider saying, you asked about lessons learned along the way. Um, I Some of what I'm about to say is just native to one's personality, but I do think that what I'm about to say can be crafted and skilled and honed. And I think English majors are probably better equipped than most to do this. And what I'm about to say is be extroverted, be a good communicator, be empathetic. Um, I have so now some of this comes from living in the same place for 57 years. You don't walk the streets without seeing people that you know you or who knew your parents or whoever. But to get involved, to care, opens so many doors that you just have no idea. I mean, the last time I applied for a job was 1998. Since then, jobs have found me. And each one has been exciting and scary, all wrapped up into one. But honestly, I don't think that would have happened even back when I was a classroom teacher, which I will admit was probably the most isolated and sequestered. I mean, that's by design. You close your classroom door and you're with those students for 50 minutes or however long it is. So you know what you're getting into. But even then, I found it really important to find volunteer opportunities in my off time and my spare time. And turns out when you volunteer, you meet people. And you're not doing that, at least you shouldn't be doing that transactionally. You don't make friends or volunteer because you want something out of it, other than the satisfaction of doing it, but you meet like-minded people. And if you are social enough and empathetic enough and can behave sufficiently like a good friend and someone who's genuinely interested in what you have to learn from other people, opportunities will present themselves. That's been my experience.
Oh, I love that. You
So
told
in a world of AI, be real and make real relationships.
Roger said, go outside, meet people, touch grass. But no, I love that. And be empathetic, get involved, care, and behave it sufficiently like a good friend. I love that so much. Um, so thank you so much for sharing. We've got about 30 minutes left. Anyone have a question for Roger? You can either drop it in the chat and I can read it, or you can come off, you can unmute and you can come on camera if you want. Don't be shy, I promise. Roger doesn't bite.
No, I don't.
Ooh, Dr. Howells has raised her hand. Go ahead.
Roger, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate it. And it's so good to see you. I love how you talked about the importance of networking and the idea that networking is about being out there, being extroverted. I want to follow up on how you follow up on that meeting people, because one of the things, anyone who has ever done anything for you, anyone who has ever come and given a lecture knows that you are the king of the thank you note. And I know you are putting your English major to good use because you write fantastic thank you notes. So I want you to kind of close that circle. You get out there, you meet people, but how do you cultivate those relationships? Maybe talk a little bit about the gratitude and thank you notes. Can you tell us how you think about that whole process from the meeting to the thanking?
Yeah, I really appreciate and I appreciate your being here. This is very nice of you to have the interest to be in your box there. I love it. Let's start with the thank you note. This may seem so silly and so, I don't know, perfunctory or whatever, but it's not, as it turns out. I grew up in a home. I have a brother who's just a little over a year younger than I am. And one of my earliest memories is of my brother Steve and me sitting at our kitchen table with pens in hand and some probably dippy little writing paper that our mother bought for us. And my mother was one of these kind of people who she wasn't quite as extreme as you're going to write thank you notes before you play with the toys that people just gave you for your birthday, but it was almost like that. And so she would literally dictate the words that we would write to Mr. So and so, Ms. So and so, cousin so and so. And somehow or other, by osmosis, that process continued until we came up with words of our own and we didn't need the dictation anymore. So that's a long way to say that I grew up in a family where there was an expectation of that. What I have learned in more recent years is that what was just a given, what was not optional at all in the home I grew up in now sets one apart. And the first season, the first 9-week term that the Learning Center engaged in 2007, I was so busy and there was so many details that required my attention. And building the next season, which came along incredibly, right? I thought, okay, this has been successful. I guess we have to do this again now. And too much time went by before I was able to thank the 9 lecturers and the 8 9-week instructors who had given their time to our program. And I remember one weekend, I said to myself, if I don't get these thank you notes done this weekend, I might as well just not do them because they're going to be so embarrassingly late. So I took home a stack of letterhead and a pen, and I thought it was the most potentially unprofessional thing I had ever done to handwrite notes to these people. And I thought, well, you know what? And I didn't have a printer at home. I thought if this is unprofessional, somebody will call me on it and I'll never do it again. I'll always type notes again. The opposite is what happened. People wrote me emails saying, I cannot remember when I received something handwritten in the mail. So something that I thought was kind of sloppy ended up being my signature calling card, and I've never typed a thank you letter since then. So it's not that hard, especially when genuineness shows through. It's not rote. Never, ever, ever do I begin a thank you note with "thank you so much." You're an English major. You can come up with some better way to start your writing than that, and name something really specific in that lecture or in that course that people. Sometimes I begin my notes with "people are still talking about what you did." You know, it's there are ways that you can be clever. So bring your writing skills to bear. But yeah, the reason I emphasize this appreciation so much is that Dr. Parker and Dr. Howells and anybody else you stop in the English department of Georgia Southern can tell you they do not receive money for teaching at the Learning Center. And in some settings, that would be a dead end street. Maybe you get a favor one time, but one time would be all. And so what I often say, if people are wanting to know what, one of the secret sauces of the Learning Center, what we lack in currency, we better make up for in courtesy. You got to make people feel appreciated or you're going to be nowhere.
I love that. And in the chat, Professor Mrochek writes, Roger, you spoke in my Writing for Nonprofits class at least 10 years ago, and you talked to my students about the art of the thank you note, and that lesson has stuck with me. So if you think, or if you thought that Roger was just, flying by the seat of his pants answering this question, no, very, very, very consistent. And I've been a recipient of these thank you notes before too, coming in the mail, right? And I was like, oh, I didn't even know Roger had my address. And it's always so heartwarming to receive. And so I want to sort of take a different direction. So there's a lot of media out there right now talking about the death of the humanities, and that there's a need for higher education to focus on job preparation instead. And so how would you respond to that for our current students? Like, do you think you would have been I feel like I know the answer to this, but do you think you would have been better off like focus with more narrow preparation? Because you got the English degree and then you got the teacher education certification to sort of for your job security, but like, could you talk about that? Like, how would you respond to that first?
Yeah, I mean, I think I would make the same decision again, even today. And I want to choose my words carefully because I don't want anyone to go away thinking that I am denigrating job training or something really specific, like in the STEM or what is it called now, STEAM or something. They've added a letter to it, I think. So all due respect to people who go into medical or engineering or law or any of those things, great, we need all of that. Um, I I didn't think that I had that in me. And it's not that I didn't think I was smart enough to do that. I didn't think that at all. But I knew even, from ages 18 to 22, what satisfied me. And that was something in the humanities. And so in some ways it was kind of a selfish choice. I wanted a very high degree of life happiness, even if I didn't make a ton of money. And I do fine in the work that I do. I'm not needy or anything financially speaking, but I think that I lead a much richer interior life than I would just going to the hospital or going to the drafting table or going to the court. I don't know that a job like that would have fed me as much as what I've done instead. And I would make the exact same decision again. Honestly, when I came to senior citizens, everybody was very nice to me, but I was definitely in this one of these things is not like the others category. And so the social services people, the social workers all around me, I look back now and I think they were trying to figure out who I was and what I was trying to accomplish. So I would describe even before the Learning Center opened for its first season, I was describing kind of what, you know, what it was all about. And all that they were able, the only language that I was speaking that they understood was socialization, like this little bit of time in between classes when people would talk to each other over the coffee maker. And I, socialization just sounded so clunky and clinical and awful to me. Like that's not the point, right? The point is the material. The point is what lights my fire is the literature and the episodes from history and so on. That's what motivates me. And so what I would playfully say to my social worker colleagues, and I still say this occasionally, I think, at the risk of sounding schmaltzy, I think that the humanities represents a rich reservoir of moral wisdom across millennia of time. And I think that learning who human beings are and how we behave and how we've evolved, I think that that is what gives us the impulse to engage in social services. So if I'm being snotty, what I'll say to my social worker colleagues is, my discipline gave birth to your discipline. I mean, it seriously, it gives us the impulse not to club one another in the streets and drag each other by the hair and kill each other for food. We empathize. We know what it's like we understand the human condition. And again, it might sound schmaltzy, but I really believe that. And that's what has sustained me through, going on now 40 years of being in the line of work that I'm in. I believe in the material. I believe in the body of work that's out there. And I'm never tired of exploring it.
Great. Well, I've got a question for you, but it's from Glenn. Glenn in the chat says, I've been thinking of teaching middle school English. And so I'm curious about what you just said. It says, are there specific classes that would help me the most, like more literature classes? Like which ones should he be taking? Post-colonial, Shakespeare, British literature. And so in line with what you said, that literature helps us not club each other in the streets. Do you have any suggestions for Glenn as he's thinking about middle school English?
Yeah, so I am a huge school nerd, and I think that if I could afford just to be a student all the time, that's what I would enjoy doing. Um, I I will answer this question. I take as much content as your schedule will allow and your degree program will allow. Um, I think that because I didn't take 19th century British in my undergraduate preparation, I took 18th century, I took 20th century, 19th century. I had more than fulfilled the requirement for that line item, but I feel like it's a deficit. It's a deficit in my background. Does that mean that I could never, ever, ever teach literature from 19th century England? No, it doesn't mean that, because as English majors, we are given the tools to unlock and decode the literature, and we can read, right? We can read biographical information and background and sociological works, and we can decode our own century, but it's not the same as having the expert like Dr. Howells unlock that for you, lead the way, bear the light. So I was actually, all due respect to people who were just through and through education majors who spent, back in the day, it was Victor Hall. I don't know what it is, where education is now at Armstrong, but there are people who spend their entire life, their entire undergraduate career in the education department. I was jealous of time in Gamble Hall in the English department when I felt like I was sort of going through the motions in the education department. So believe it or not, at the end of my degree program, I pled my case in order to not have one education course and instead to take 20th century British with a professor back then named Rich Raymond, who was legendary in the department back then. And so I don't know how I got that special papal dispensation to take a content course instead of a methods course, but I'm glad that I did. So as long as your schedule allows and your tuition money holds out and you don't mind delaying graduation by a semester or two, take as much content as you possibly can. You will not regret the background that it'll give you as a teacher. You'll just be that much better prepared, in my opinion.
Selfishly, we agree with this assessment to take all of the English classes. Other questions for Roger? Don't be shy. Glenn says, thank you. I love the answer. I want to learn it all.
I know, I'm so glad we're hogging all the questions, the faculty are. So I hope students know they can ask questions too.
Yes. Let's see. Aaron Thacker says, what classes could one take to help articulate their speech so that one could communicate effectively, to be more confident, to become extroverted?
Yeah, when I was an undergraduate, I don't know if this is still the case at Georgia Southern today, but there was a pretty sure I'm right about this. There was a public speaking course that was required of English made. Maybe there's a choice, public speaking or introduction to linguistics. I'm reaching back a lot of years, back to the late 1980s. But so yeah, a public speaking course. And in many lit courses, I think that there was a classroom presentation that was required in by most of my professors. So all of that helps a lot. And I don't want to take away one iota from the public speaking preparation that undergraduate English majors undertake. I will tell you though that, and this does not mean I don't get nervous. I was a little bit nervous before this hour. You don't ever want to lose that entirely because I think there's a little shot of adrenaline that it's not a bad thing, to give your what you're saying a little more energy. But I will tell you that the biggest, longest, and best runway for becoming completely comfortable in front of groups in a public speaking way was 10 years in a high school classroom. You're presenting every single day. You just simply get comfortable and you read your audience and you can tell when you're connecting and maybe even just as importantly when you're not connecting. But those are, and they're also, we're all English majors, and I think I can talk shop with you this way. I think we are all, and we should be, in some measure, self-conscious about our own speech. And I think that we have the ability to rid our speech of things that are bad speaking habits, saying, you can get rid of that. You can do that. And any other habits that you might find yourself doing along the way. If people who are in your audiences are nice enough and gentle enough to tell you, take that and be appreciative for it. But yeah, I mean, just and I guess in a more like a one-on-one kind of way, the best advice that I can give is to listen to the person you're talking to and ask them questions about themselves. I know people who are so nervous about being out of their depth in a conversation. And I'm not saying that I would feel utterly and completely comfortable if I was talking to some great statesman or some great scientist. But what I find is we've all been in this situation when someone is pretending they know something that they don't really know. That is dangerous business because you can get caught on that immediately and really embarrassingly. What I do in social situations or educational situations, if somebody is trying to impress me or speaking above my ability to understand, my favorite thing to say is, you know what? I know absolutely nothing about that. Can you tell me about that? That is the biggest gift you can give to somebody in a conversation, to let them talk about themselves or something that they value. And then you're not running the risk of sounding like an idiot, you know?
Oh, that's funny. And I want to say you've got a couple of like thank you comments. So one, Aaron says, learn by doing, greatly appreciate this feedback. Corinne says, thank you for the encouragement to continue on as a non-traditional student. And then Evan Pearson wrote, I'm a philosophy major, English minor, and I highly resonate with your assertion of the humanities leading to a higher quality of, quote, internal life that really echoes sentiments from modern philosopher Martin Nussbaum, but put it into really understandable words. So thank you for sharing that.
My pleasure.
And, I think another way to sort of get good at, boosting your confidence is to unmute and come on camera and ask a question. This is a safe space.
It's funny, Roger. It's your point about being a little nervous before this. It's interesting because certain things you're super nervous the first time, but it does get easier with practice, don't
Oh,
you?
yeah.
And the things that you were doing at work 15 years ago would make you really, and now you can go walk in a room and do it without thinking about it. I think that's that important point you're making about practice.
Yeah. Kendra brought up this notion of imposter syndrome. Oh my gosh, I made the point early in this hour that I'm an English major. I'm not a historian, but very often I play one at the Learning Center. And what that means is that we all have the tools and the ability to research something. And I'm not trying to denigrate the people who come with decades of experience and can speak so intelligently about their own area. But ultimately, if I'm called on to make a presentation about something that I'm a little less familiar with, you got to do your homework. I mean, sometimes it's scores of hours in preparation for just 1 hour of presentation. But you want to make sure, first of all, that you're not saying anything that isn't true. And then the second thing you want to make sure of is that you don't have any major blind spots. And then by that time, in nobody comes to the Learning Center for a degree or for college credit or anything like that. And I don't mean to denigrate what we do at all, but it's enrichment, it's cultural enrichment. And as long as I know a little bit more than the people in the room and I can convey that material enthusiastically and knowledgeably with interesting images up on a screen, it's going to be fine. It's going to be, and people are going to be grateful for it.
Karine, I see your hand.
Thank you. Yes, hi, I'm Corinne. Nice to meet you, Mr. Smith.
It's really
I
fine to call me Roger, by the way.
okay. Respect. I've learned that here in Georgia. And respect. Question. As you mentioned earlier, you were also a French teacher. Now, I want to do that maybe in a few years. How did you go about doing that? And which I don't want to spend another 3 years to getting a master's.
Hmm. Yeah, I understand that. So your question is, how is it that I got certified to teach French alongside
How could I
English?
do? Yes, how could I do that?
Yeah, well, for in my situation, I took every French course that Armstrong and Georgia Southern, and not all the Georgia Southern courses. I graduated from Armstrong, not from Georgia Southern, but there were opportunities at Georgia Southern primarily in the summers and in the evenings. So I just fitted those courses in to my 4 years of undergraduate school. And therefore, when I graduated, I had this kind of ridiculously strong a minor in French. And I think I was 5 hours fewer French courses than English courses. And so I felt confident enough to teach French levels 1, 2, 3, and 4 at that time. From the standpoint of the state of Georgia, with that number of credit hours in French, so I had a provisional certificate for my first year of teaching to teach French, with the understanding and the expectation that I would take one French language methods course, like teaching French in a classroom. And that course was offered the summer after my first year of teaching at Georgia Southern, the Statesboro campus. So I took that course, and dear Lord have mercy, it was teaching foreign languages to elementary school students. So I don't know, I think it was an 8 week or 7 week course, the final week of which was teaching French to about 10, I am not making this up, 10 5-year-olds. And I did it. I wasn't good at it, but I did it. And that was what made my certification to teach French in Georgia equal to my certification to teach English in Georgia. So it
I
wasn't really that hard, is where I'm going with that.
I do not want to do high school, middle school, or elementary. I would like to do it in the first year college, like elementary French. I do speak French, by the way. I just wanted to make sure what kind of degree would I need extra with that beside my English to start
Yeah.
doing that.
Well, the department faculty members who were on this call could probably answer the question better than I can. I think the University System of Georgia has really, and I applaud them for this, they've made even adjunct instructors have advanced degrees. I think the days of teaching as an adjunct professor with only an undergraduate or only a master's are probably in the past.
Yeah, so it's a master's or 18 hours of graduate credit.
Hmm. Yeah. But don't sell yourself short, Karine. Do that. If that's your goal, invest the time, and I think you're going to find that it'll be worth it.
Excellent. We had a
That's a
question.
thought.
I mean, don't sell yourself short. I think that's really good advice, though.
Thank
Evan,
you so much.
I hope I pronounced your first name
You
correctly.
did. You did.
Okay.
Thank you. Yes.
we have a question from Evan in the chat. Any advice for someone that is looking to graduate this year and is very interested in working for a nonprofit specifically? Any preparation that I should do?
If you're just looking at nonprofits in a very general sense, put your resume, put yourself out there across a wide variety of different missions, but pay attention to the word mission. And if you're really pursuing, it helps a lot to care, and I mean care authentically for the mission of a nonprofit. So if you can limit yourself to, I know I want to help older people. I know I want to be involved in a nonprofit that helps animals. And pick your area and volunteer in that area. There are plenty of professional positions that come about through volunteering first, so that the organization gets to know you and gets to trust you and respect you. Um, but yeah, and I think the same is true for grant writing. That the most authentic and effective grant writing is when the author cares about the mission. That that will come through the page or come through the screen. I think so. Yeah, ask yourself what nonprofits you feel drawn to, and then put yourself in the pathway of those nonprofits.
Lisa Dusenberry, Dr. Dusenberry. Yes.
Thank you so much for this, Roger. Our knowing that our students are probably going to come out and go through 5 to 7 career changes in their life, and obviously you
Guilty.
do some of that. Can you offer any advice you have on like reframing your skills or how you go out there? Because I think some of that is the big blockage. English majors can do anything, but you have to be able to tell people how the things that you can do connect to what they want.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good question. And before I approximate an answer to it, let me just say it would terrify me to have to compete for a job in the market today. I mean, like I'm only barely in LinkedIn, and I don't think I have the tools right this minute if I had to work to do something else. But I hope that as an English major and person with a reasonable amount of intelligence, I would be able to figure it out. But yeah, I would say that English majors are definitely more equipped than average to pivot. That's a good word that you used, and to convince a prospective employer that they have the communication skills and the passion to do a great job. Um, yeah, I feel utterly unsuited to today's job market and how one goes about finding finding a professional position. But you're right. What's going to happen is that you're going to try a few different things, and one thing is going to lead to another. Um, and uh, y- yeah, it's. I'm not sure I'm answering your question very well, but I don't want to keep relying on the same old crutch of building relationships, but that's what's worked for me. And so, make that circle as wide as it can be, but as deep as it can be too. And I just hope that opportunities will come find the students, not have to, for them to be chasing it. But I would also say, I mean, one position that I seriously thought about, and therefore, I mean, no disrespect at all, for a little while, midway through my decade in the high school classroom, I thought I wanted to be a flight attendant. I mean, I spoke French, and so, of course, wanted to be much more important than the people who would just seat the passengers from you know New York to Chicago. I wanted the Paris route. And a good friend of mine looked at me and said, really, you might be giving out peanuts in French, but you're still going to be giving out peanuts. So I didn't end up pursuing that, but I sometimes wonder what if, I might not still live in Savannah if I had done that for a couple of years. You just never can tell. If you decide to take a job, do it with all your heart, and I think that enthusiasm and commitment will show and will create its own opportunities.
Well, I have a question that I think it might wrap us up. We're coming close to the time. But we've talked a lot about work and networking and being confident and pivoting, learning how to pivot. But could you tell us some of the activities that you like to engage in outside of your work, and how do these help you, or do they help you achieve a work-life balance? Is that a myth?
Um, a lot of no, I adore my extracurriculars, and many people who know me and are close to me think that I take on too much, and that it's kind of like I've never met a committee or a board that I wasn't interested in. But if I'm interested in the mission of the organization, I want to be a part of it in some way. So across a long, long, long swath of years, I was at the invitation of a friend whom I really respected. She's passed away now, or I would still respect her. But I was on the board for way, way, way too long, for 21 years, of a local organization called the Savannah Council on World Affairs. And so meeting people who were fellow board members, meeting speakers from around the country who were experts in foreign relations, all of those enriched my life, and I learned a great deal and met wonderful people. Today, there's an organization that really Armstrong English faculty gave birth to in the late 1980s, and that's the Flannery O'Connor Childhood Home. It's a museum that was the childhood home of the author Flannery O'Connor. And I was invited probably 2 years ago to join that board. And one hand washes the other. I enjoy working on that board and planning events. But in the 2025 centennial of Flannery O'Connor's birth, I was able to get my new Flannery O'Connor friends and some old Flannery O'Connor friends to do Flannery O'Connor programming at the Learning Center. So there's nothing wrong with feeding two birds with the same piece of bread. It works beautifully. I have a real social conscience for the LGBTQ plus community. So there is a fledgling, if I'm being honest, kind of struggling local chapter of a national organization called PFLAG, which it embraces parents, friends, allies of the queer community. And so in the last year or so, I've joined that board as well. So there are public education opportunities and there are party planning opportunities. And I've met a lot of other wonderful people, close relationships with the Savannah Pride Center. If there's a spark in you that tells you that you're interested in something and you want to devote some time to it, you are going to meet like-minded people and you're going to have rewarding experiences. At least that's been what's happened to me.
Oh, wow. Well, Roger, you've given us a lot to think about. I mean, you just said if there's a spark in you, you're going to meet like-minded people. You said there's plenty of time for us. You can refashion something for yourself. You told us to be good communicators, get involved, care, volunteer, don't be transactional, behave like a good friend. And I think you even told us to ask ourselves, would we be willing to leave our comfort zone, whether it's a job or a major, to create or pursue something that doesn't exist yet. And I know this was for the students, but I'm leaving inspired and I'm super excited. So I thank you so much for joining us. And do you have any last words you want to leave us with, or are you?
I'm very, very flattered and very grateful for this opportunity. As I've already made really, really clear, Georgia Southern University, Armstrong, the English department, the people there do me and my program so many. I'm very, very, very often on the receiving end of good things from the university, and it feels great to give back something really small in return. So I appreciate the invitation. I think that Georgia Southern and Armstrong have treated me so well that I'm thrilled to carry those markers around and to do anything I can in return to say thank you.
Let's give Roger one last round of virtual applause. Thank you so much. Thank you all for joining us.
And thank you, Dr. Parker.
Oh, yes. Hi, that's me. Did I introduce myself? I don't know.
You're a fabulous host.
Oh, she's fantastic.
So
Thank you, Dr. Parker.
y'all are so welcome. Y'all have a good evening.